This program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
We will call the meeting to order. Welcome to the March 2nd, 2020 meeting of the Eau Claire Plan Commission. This meeting is being broadcast live by Valley Media Works on Charter Channel 994, WRFP-LP 101.9 FM, and online at valleymediaworks.org. The Plan Commission the Plan Commission attempts to conduct its public hearings in a relatively informal manner with the constraint that we must deal with issues before us in an orderly and businesslike fashion. We give the applicant an opportunity to speak first, and then others either for or against a proposal are each permitted to speak once. We do request that everyone restrict their comments to the issues before us, avoid unnecessary repetition, and be prudent in the use of time. We want to be sure that we have adequate time to review and discuss all items with equal diligence. Please remember to turn your phones to off or silent so they don't disrupt the meeting. Also, if you do plan to speak tonight, there are some yellow or gold slips of paper on the back there. If you would fill those out and give them to Mr. Petrie up in front. And when you come to the microphone, please introduce yourself with your name and address. So we have 2 items for public hearing tonight, and then we will go into a discussion about our 5-year comprehensive plan review and then some other formalities before we close the meeting. So item number 1 is a public hearing for recommendation to City Council for a site plan of a commercial building, the Quick Trip at 3801 Gateway Drive. Mr. Petrie.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Before you tonight is a rezoning of the famous Walmart house. It's number 1 on the map shown here in the southwest corner of the city. This is the existing parcel. It's currently zoned temporary C3. I would add that this is one of the only parcels in the community that is temporary C3 zoning. Here's an aerial photograph showing the parcel and showing the Walmart behind it. You can see the single family home there with the detached garage along Gateway Drive. Tonight before you is a rezoning from the TC3 to C3P to adopt the general development plan with a site plan for a commercial building for the Quick Trip at 3801 Gateway Drive. This property is currently under contract for purchase. In your packet this evening is the site plan showing the proposed store with convenience store with gas and car wash. The comprehensive plan identifies this area as commercial. During when the development of the Walmart store, they did propose to buy this property in the early 1990s when the store was built. The owners did not want to sell to the Walmart. So this has been vacant, or this house has been occupied ever since then, over the past 30 plus years. The owners recently passed away and now is, like I mentioned, is under contract. The site plan in your packet shows the new concept store for Quick Trip. It's approximately 8,300 square feet. Does include a storage area, and as I mentioned, the car wash and fuel to the west. The car wash would be behind the store to the south. In your packet too shows the truck movement. They are proposing 2 access points off of Gateway Drive. They are also proposing to work with Walmart to get access into their parking lot on the northeast side of the proposal. Also in your packet shows the lighting plan, the landscape plan, and other elevations and lighting plan as shown here. The elevation of the proposed store. Again, the site plan shows an 8,300 square foot building. A narrative is provided by the applicant of the proposed architecture and facade of the building. This is a new prototype for Quick Trip. As noted, this is a larger footprint retail store that they're proposing, as well as kitchen and mechanical and storage with no basement. The required parking for the facility is 34 stalls. They're proposing 39 stalls. Again, as I mentioned, the site plan shows 2 access points onto Gateway Drive. The driveways do meet the standards for the city of Eau Claire. Also, they're proposing one access point to a Walmart parking lot. The site plan, as mentioned, does show the truck movement, deliveries for both fuel and for the store. I did note in the report that a pedestrian connection is shown or is required. It was actually number 21 on the site plan. As you can see here, it is access from the front building to the public sidewalk, so that condition should be removed. The landscape plan does show street trees, foundation plantings, and other landscaping throughout the site. The applicant should add bicycle parking to the site and should be in compliance with the city standards. The dumpster enclosure shall be fully screened. The proposed signage for the store should meet C3 district standards and will be reviewed by a permit. The site in the engineering report does have some issues with sewer. There is no sewer along Gateway Drive. It's actually in the Walmart parking lot. My understanding is the applicant is working with Walmart to get that from their parking lot to this facility. There is existing water to the site. Public utilities, traffic, and transit is noted in your report. They are proposing 2 driveways onto Gateway Drive at 35 feet. That will require Plan Commission approval. Typically, we will allow up to 30 feet without a waiver from the Plan Commission. There is a few conditions that need to be met before we can issue a building permit. This would be reviewed by the City Council next Monday at public hearing, and then Tuesday for the vote. We did receive an email from a property concerned about the traffic, is noted on your dais this evening. With that, I'd be standing for any questions this evening.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Commissioner Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Petrie, the sidewalk connection you noted to the west to Gateway Drive, appreciate that that's there. I guess my question is there a way to connect to the east toward Walmart? Because certainly imagine people walking from that direction as well. Would that be something we could ask them to work with Walmart on as well, in addition to the fact that they're approaching Walmart about a driveway access?
Excellent question this evening. The applicant is here. That would be something to mention to them. Potentially, they could work with Walmart. The concern I would have, Walmart is an existing site. I'm not sure how the pedestrians would get from their door to Quick Trip's front door or side door even. But you could definitely ask the applicant that question too.
Mr. Christopherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Petrie, I'm wondering about the conversation on traffic. I see that there is a TIA that is in progress. So would you inform me, please, of how we evaluate that or recommend to council with that information not available?
Excellent question. I would defer that to the city engineer, Ms. Ness.
At this time, we've actually received the draft IR or abbreviated TIA for this site. We are reviewing it with the county. The county actually maintains the intersection of Gateway Drive and Prill Road, that set of intersections. Additionally, at this time, the DOT, ourselves, and the county have a study that is ongoing along Gulf Road, analyzing the interchange and the corridor signal timings. So as we receive results from those, we'll be able to make a more informed decision on how to progress with the Gulf Road corridor, and then if that would have impacts on this site that we would need to work with the developer on.
Any other questions for Mr. Petrie? All right, thank you. And I understand the applicant is here. Perhaps not. Okay. Are there any members of the public who came to speak on this topic tonight? members of the public came to speak on this zoning change? All right. I will see if there's a motion. Commissioner Christopherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I really would like to have more information before voting on this or recommending it to council. So maybe I will make a motion to postpone until our next meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Peterson. Any discussion? Mr. Granlund.
Brenholt works fun. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support Commissioner Christopherson's motion. It's concerning to me that given the scope of this request, that we don't have the applicant present as well. So I'd be strongly in favor of postponement. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
just I did talk with them, and I thought they would be here this evening, but I have not got an email confirmation that they're not coming, so just to
Okay.
keep that informed.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Peterson.
I have a question for Ms. Ness, if I may. With the analysis that's being done on Gulf Road, I assume the extension Prill Road also, does that include the traffic from this site?
It does. The land use model that was used with the analysis and forecasted out 25 years includes the development traffic as well. Also, the initial review of the site was provided to the DOT and to the county for their incorporation into the analysis as well. Looking at the traffic forecast, for the Gulf Road corridor, a Saturday peak hour is analyzed. We required a weekday evening analysis for this site. And so we have different numbers, but they do fall into the planned zoning and the planned trip generation that was originally allotted for this area in the original Parsons study that was done, and then SEH did an update to that study in 2003.
And if I may add one more question, when will that analysis be completed?
I talked to the DOT today, and they anticipate seeing the report within the next 2 weeks.
Okay, so it could be before or after our next meeting, which...
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, we will call the roll on the motion to postpone. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I see none. All right. So that is item number 1. Item number 2 is a public hearing for recommendation to City Council on public zoning requests at Carson Park to recommend approval of Carson Park Baseball Stadium improvements.
Good evening. Are your monitors working? I see one is out here now. They're working, all right. The City of Eau Claire is proposing to replace the metal bleachers along the first and third base sides of the Carson Park Baseball Stadium. And this is shown as item 2 on your agenda there over in Carson Park. This is the vicinity map and zoning map showing generally where the baseball stadium is located within the park, and then the aerial map of the stadium. Carson Park Drive to the south, football field to the north, and then the major parking lot to the west. As part of the construction of the new bleachers, ADA accessible restrooms will be constructed underneath the back portion of the bleachers, and in addition, new concession areas, dugouts, and storage areas will be also provided. The current metal bleachers were constructed in 1964. And they were built to be portable, moved each year between the baseball stadium and the football stadium, again, the football stadium located to the north. The dugouts are not original either. They were constructed in the mid-1980s. The bleachers have long been a safety concern as the area below the bench seats are open to the ground. In addition, the bleachers are not able to accommodate spectators having a disability, nor offer them comparable viewing opportunities available to other spectators. Here's this is a Google aerial view here showing the two bleachers that we would replace as part of this project here. And then these are some photographs of the metal bleachers. I'm sure many of you have sat on these bleachers over the years. I remember years and years ago being in these bleachers with my two little kids and being deathly afraid of their every movements while we were in those bleachers. The project itself, as I mentioned, consists of two permanent bleacher structures along each baseline. Each structure would seat approximately 456 spectators, which is similar to the seating capacity of the bleachers right now. In addition, the two bleachers combined would provide a viewing area to accommodate about 38 wheelchair locations. The sides and the back of the bleachers will be enclosed with a rock face block that has a color and a texture similar to that of the historic baseball stadium. This enclosure not only conceals the supporting part of the structure, but it also creates the enclosure for the amenities that we had talked about here. So this is the floor plan of the bleacher structure here. Both are pretty much the same in terms of that, the one that's along the first base side. And the third base side, the upper left-hand diagram, there basically is the floor plan for the bleachers in terms of what the amenities would be below that, including some storage areas, men's and women's restrooms that are kind of over in the lower right corner, concession area, and then some area for IT or kind of more the highly sensitive electronic information. I'll have a little more detailed floor plan of this in just a minute here. This is the actual site plan for the project. And again, I don't have a pointer that I can use here, but you can see along the first base side and then the third base side where the dugout structure is located, and then where the two bleachers are located. The dugouts are kind of the long rectangular structures, and then the bleachers themselves are a little bit more the boxy side. This particular structure is a little bit the way it was made into a PDF. Some of the actual dimensions have been skewed a little bit, but each dugout would be the same size. Each bleacher structure would be the same size. The dugouts would be just a little bit longer, so they have a little bit more capacity than the existing dugouts. The question that came up at Parks and Waterways, the part of the dugouts that would be closest to home plate, they would basically be about the same location as the existing dugouts that are within the current stadium. Let's see here. A couple artist renderings of the bleachers. This would be from the bleachers looking onto the field. From the field looking on towards the bleachers. Rather than having the bench seats that the existing bleachers have, these actually would have the box seats that are in the other part of the stadium, so they'd be much more comfortable for the spectators, provide a much more, just a better atmosphere for the use at the field. This would be the back portion of the stadium, again, of the bleachers, again showing the textured, colored block face with the colored trim and railings. Also as shown here on the far left would be a ramp that would go up to the existing bleachers. When I get done here, then Jeff Pippinger from our Community Services Department, and then we have representatives from AIRS here too, that'll kind of fill in some of the details that I have not provided here. The proposed project does not involve any changes to the historic portion of the stadium. The stadium was constructed in 1936. The stadium itself was put on the National Register in 2003 and then locally designated in 2004. Since the proposed renovations are in proximity to the historic portion of the baseball stadium, we did submit the project for review to the Wisconsin Historical Society. And upon their review of the project, they approved the project, and we have documentation of that in our file. As part of the site plan review process, the project was also reviewed by the Landmarks Commission. They recommended approval. They had a couple comments. One, that they did note that the city should work to eventually have the green trim on the baseball stadium painted to match the green trim on the new bleachers, because when the new bleachers come in, that green color will not match perfectly. So there are plans at a later date to paint the trim on the historic part of the stadium, again, kind of tying that together. The Landmark Commission also discussed the rock face block. And they felt that that was a good fit for the design, as the block face would resemble the stone of the stadium in color and texture, but not try to replicate the exterior of the stadium. Something in terms of historic preservation, try not to, when we build a new structure, not try to replicate that historic part of the structure completely. We want to tie in some of the important design elements, but we don't want to replicate it exactly. And the commission thought that this did a fairly good job with that. Also, the colored trim, the railings, and the fencings will tie the two structures together too, is what they indicated. The site plan was also reviewed by the Waterways and Parks Commission. They also recommended approval. They recommended that the city should give consideration to adding at least one family or a general neutral restroom in one of the bleacher structures. Ayers Associates looked at that request, reviewed the plans, and developed an option where we could add a family restroom to one of the bleachers. The estimated cost of that would increase the project by about $30,000. This drawing here shows the detailed floor plan of one of the bleachers, and it shows basically what we can do is convert what used to be part of the mechanical area. The mechanical area will be scaled down a little bit, and the family restroom or the general neutral restroom can be placed at the location as shown in the area there, as shown. And then that IT room, which was going to be in that area, will be shifted over into the upper left-hand corner. So essentially, kind of the long and short of it, will reduce the amount of storage within the area by a little bit to accommodate that family restroom area. Finally, not included in the staff report or the plans, we do plan on adding bicycle parking or bicycle racks in the vicinity of the stadium. Based on the provisions of the zoning ordinance, taking a look at the number of seats that would be constructed, so not additional, but just in terms of the new bleachers, we would anticipate a need for about 11 new racks, bicycle racks, for this to accommodate this based on what our code says. And we would anticipate that location-wise, we'd place about half of those on the south side of the stadium and then about half over on the west side of the stadium. And they'd be available for not only for baseball use, for other use within the park, football games, festivals, maybe someone coming up to use the train operation or something like that. So they'd be able to use for multiple use. Two other things that are occurring related to bicycle parking is that the city did budget funds this year and the next couple of years to provide bicycle parking at city facilities such as this. So as part of this, we'll be doing a needs analysis for our parks in terms of what bicycle parking should be for the whole park. But this would address specifically the baseball stadium. In addition, we're in the process of hiring a consultant to update our 1997 Carson Park management plan. And bicycle parking would be one of those things that we'll take a look at as the update of that management plan. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Jeff. He can kind of fill in a little bit more details for you here.
Thank you, Pat. Good evening. As usual, Pat does a great job in explaining. What I'll do is just touch on a couple of things. And I have a map here. A question did come up regarding trees. There will be 9 trees that we will be removing, and primarily they'll be removed because of the construction. We've had our forester go out, look at the areas. 3 of those trees will actually fall into where the first base bleachers will be, so they wouldn't be able to survive there either. But the other remaining trees, and I'm going to pass this around for you to look at, because I don't have the overhead to show you, but you'll be able to see the trees X'd, and the X's will be the ones that we have to move, either because they're in the construction area or they're going to be impacted from the utilities we have to put through. You'll see several circles on this map that will show the trees that we're going to protect and we're going to keep there that we feel that we can save. So I'm going to just pass this around. You can look at that. The only other thing I would add, and I'm going to see if I can get back to the biggest part of what we looked at, besides certainly a need for replacing the bleachers themselves because of their age, and many of you and Pat mentioned that if you have kids in there, you're always worried about that. And certainly we won't have any problems with this bleacher system because it's completely closed on top, so there's no way of falling between. And the other item besides safety, we're looking at enhancing the spectator, the customer experience at the park. And certainly with having stadium seating, having a backrest, that certainly does that. The other item with safety was the dugouts. We looked at several different types of dugout systems. The one that we are going with is the same type of dugout that's being used by the Milwaukee Timber Rattlers over in Appleton and in Fox City Stadiums. Again, if you've been to a baseball game, especially with our dugouts, because they are small, they don't hold a whole team because you have, and the result of that, you have players sitting on the outside of the dugout, and they're in the field of play essentially, and we don't want that. And certainly we have high school teams that play there. We have the American Legion team along with the Eau Claire Bears and Cavaliers, and then certainly the Express. So this will prevent any of that happening. The other issue that we had is that our bleachers aren't ADA compliant and didn't really have anywhere for folks that had difficulties if they were in a wheelchair and their companion couldn't sit and watch the game at the same level as anybody else that is watching the game. So this will give us 38 additional sites, 19 on each side, that we will be able to accommodate that for folks in that need. I'm going to see if I can get to the back part here. What I wanted to point out on this is that where it says Carson Park and it's got the Eau Claire baseball emblem and also restrooms, those are actually going to be they're going to be actually black, and the wording will be inlaid in the black. So it kind of looks like it's a stencil kind of sticking out, but that's actually going to be inside the black. So certainly there's going to be less maintenance for us on that, but it will actually stick out in an inlaid black. With that, I'd be happy to answer questions, but I do want to recognize we have Mr. Rivo Balchunas and Mr. Gareth Shambo from Ayers Associates. They've been working with us on this project, and we've been designing this for some time now. Fundraising's been going on since 2017, and with hopes of building this, going in construction in August of this year and having it finished by the baseball season in 2021. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? Commissioner Peterson?
I have a couple. Will there be team dressing rooms in these facilities, or will that be still in the main?
Yeah,
The
no,
main
there won't be.
stadium.
They'll be in the main grandstand area where they are now. And we do have plans in the future of refurbishing those too, because there's a need for that too.
Yeah. And if I may, secondly, with the front level seating, is there any connection between both the bleacher sections and the main grandstand without having to go down to the ground level and back up for someone in a wheelchair, or can that be accommodated?
To go down onto the field surface?
No.
Or-
You can go from where the handicap seating is in the bleachers to directly over to the grandstand, or do they have to go back down to the ground level and then back up another ramp to get to the grandstand if they see friends over there?
I believe we're maintaining that connection. Yes, okay, yes. So
Okay.
where the grandstands are now, where they meet there, we'll be maintaining that connection there.
So they can go straight across
Yeah.
then without having to go to the ground
Yeah.
level? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Brenholm?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pippinger, given the fact that the metal bleachers are moved and used during football season, are they still going to be used for the football field, or what are the plans for that?
They're 56 years old.
Yeah.
No, we're not going to use them anymore.
Okay.
They'll be scrapped. The plan for football would be that we'd be looking at a portable type of system. And as Mr. Ivory noted earlier, we're going through a Carson Park master plan. That is one thing that we're going to be looking at very closely, is the football field and how to go about, because originally part of this project was to look at putting an artificial field into the baseball. That has since been taken out because of cost of constructing this has gone higher than what we anticipated. At some point, because we've got UW Eau Claire baseball coming back into the fold, we're going to need an artificial turf on that because of just the number of teams. And Eau Claire's a baseball town. And, we put, just last year, on that field, there was about 140 games we played on that field. And now we're going to add UW Eau Claire. And they start their season earlier. They start their season actually in March. Now, I think we're wishful thinking to think we're going to be playing baseball in Wisconsin in March. But, the high schools, we try to get it open by April 15th. We try to get the field ready to go at that time. Sometimes we make it. Sometimes we're at the mercy of the weather.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Christopherson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. My first question is just to verify, there's two different statements made in the packet here. One is that this project is 912 stadium seats and 76 wheelchair. So there's 38 on each side, right?
No, that's a typo. It should be 19 on each side with 38 total handicap accessible.
All right, thank you.
That was a typo.
Thank you. And then my follow-up, do we have documentation that indicates that 38 is going to be enough? I mean, is there practice and attendance tracking that we know that that's going to serve that population?
That was part of the design process, and I believe based upon the numbers, is that how we came up with that number? So based upon what the capacity of the stadium is, that was the proper number to have. And I think we even went a little bit higher.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll have another question later.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Wolfe Grant?
Thank you, Chairperson Larson. Thank you, Mr. Pippinger. So this is just for clarification. Did Waterways and Park approve the plan with the family, restroom, gender, all gender-neutral restroom included in that? Was there a motion, or was it a friendly amendment? Was that approved in the plan when they approved it?
That's correct. That was a recommendation with approval with a family restroom.
So then that would, the wording in this would change for city council then as well, once it comes before them?
We'll make note of it. That was a recommendation coming from Waterways and Parks.
Okay, so then, okay, just to clarify though, when we vote today then, that's inclusive of that restroom, correct?
I'm not sure how your process goes, if you would have to make another recommendation.
And that's really what I'm wondering, because it was unclear to me.
I would suggest, since our staff report was put together before Parks and Waterways, it doesn't
Right.
have that recommendation.
Right.
So my suggestion would be to, when you make your recommendation, if you want to include that family restroom, to basically include that as part of your motion. That way it'll be official as we move it forward to the council.
Thank you, that answers. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Pippinger, for all of your work on this over the years. And I guess and thanks for answering all my questions from this weekend too at 6 in the morning this morning. So I guess going back to the restroom question, there's restrooms currently in the grandstand, and are there any plans to change the layout of those, and are there opportunities to include a family restroom or maybe additional family restrooms into that space? Was that something that was considered?
Yeah, and I would say yes in the future, certainly. Those restrooms are, if you've been in them, you know that they're not the most updated. And I would say at some point, if, during our master plan, we'll be looking at that, because we're looking at the whole park. I mean, we're certainly not planning on touching the baseball part of it, the field part of it, but certainly we're going to be looking at all the amenities within the park, and that will be one of them. And the problem we have, and one of the big reasons why we're extending out with putting climate-controlled restrooms on both the first base and third base side, is that we're unable to turn the water on and actually have the facilities in that grandstand area until typically May. And sometimes it goes into the middle of May, depends upon how cold that concrete has gotten, because that water service runs right below that concrete. And we've done this before, so we've learned from the past that we've turned the water on and then it's frozen, and then we've had a problem underneath, several inches of concrete being froze. So we learned that we don't turn it on until much later in the season. What that does is that our customers, one, they don't have bathrooms in April, they have to use porta-johns, and then we can't have water for concessions. So if we look at that as far as updating that, we would have to find a way that we could, whether that is insulating some pipes to try to make them to where they're not going to freeze up. But the likelihood is that grandstand area isn't going to change as far as when we're going to be able to open up those facilities in the springtime. Does that answer your question? I may have gotten a little bit more into it than what you were looking for.
Commissioner Christopherson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to go back to the family bathroom, and this might be something that would be introduced at the council. I'm not sure of the process, but when we were talking about the restrooms that have been built this winter at Owen Park, there was a motion to have it a gender neutral as opposed to just family, and I'm wondering if the city might become more consistent in calling them gender neutral bathrooms. So that would be my question and comment for.
Certainly, and we can name them anything we want, but I believe through getting state approval process, and I think I'm going to ask Rival to come up. I believe you have to use that terminology as family restaurant, but I'm going to leave it to Mr. Belchunas to answer that.
Good evening. Yeah, I'm Rival Balchunas, architect with Ayers Associates. Actually, there's really not a code requirement for, from the Wisconsin State Building Code for having a family bathroom or gender-neutral bathroom. This was simply an enhancement that was suggested by, commissioners on the Waterways and Parks Commission to simply, out of concern that you might have a parent of one gender and a child of another gender, and which room do you go to, help the child? So that was really what prompted that discussion and why it's called a family bathroom. It certainly could be used for, a gender neutral. It doesn't really matter in terms of that respect, in terms of the functionality of it. In terms of what we call it for nomenclature, I guess that's, I agree, that's probably a good policy to have, but, you could just, as they would refer to it as a unisex bathroom. So, any other questions?
Commissioner Wolfe Grant.
Thank you, Chairperson Larson. I would agree, though, that we keep the signage in the city consistent and that we're consistent with the Owen Park signage. And that signage is inclusive of either you call it all gender, gender neutral, as well as family. So I would just recommend, too, that we keep the signage consistent.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? I see none. And the city is the applicant, right?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So this is a public hearing. Are there any members of the public who came to speak on this topic tonight? Anyone to speak on the stadium expansion? All right, thank you. Let's see if there's a motion. And with regard to the gender neutral question, you can add that to your motion.
Thank you, Chairperson Larson. So guide me if I'm not wording this correctly. So I would propose a motion that the proposed change that was recommended by Waterway and Parks Commission of the inclusion of a family and gender-neutral bathroom to be consistent with the same signage that we have at Owen Park be included in our vote, and that this wording also goes before the City Council in the final plan. Is that adequate?
More than adequate. Yeah,
Oh,
that's,
my
that's fine.
apologies.
No, that's fine. That's perfect. Thank you. Is there a second?
I'd second.
Thank you. Mr. Gregor. Any discussion? Commissioner Peterson.
I just want to say, I've been going to baseball games there since the 1950s. And in my later years, you take a blanket in and sit on those bleachers. They still get hard. There's no backs to them. This is going to be nice and comfortable. And I think it's a great improvement. So I am 101% in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I see none, so we'll call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that passes. Item number 3 starts with a discussion of the 5-year comprehensive plan review. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. Included in your packet was a brief memo as a follow-up to the previous meeting to essentially look at keeping this before the commission as we kind of frame up, kind of put guardrails, if you will, on our review of the 2015 comprehensive plan. There's no magic starting date or magic ending date, so we have some flexibility in terms of how we want to structure this review. And with that, I just provided some parameters for your consideration and discussion here this evening. Before I get into that, Commissioner Christopherson also submitted to me into the day today kind of some thoughts on how to structure this as well, so we can get that further in terms of any additional detail that others may have as well moving forward. So with that, what I provided were just some initial thoughts on some of the chapters that would be worth reviewing over the next however many months this may take, and just some thoughts on kind of the rationale behind each of the potential review of each of those chapters. I also noted that the last comp plan review back in 2011 for the 2005 comprehensive plan, again, just as a reminder, did gather together 27-member, what they call the Comprehensive Review Group. That was comprised of members of that 2005 Comprehensive Plan Citizens Advisory Committee. So with that, that's one option to consider, is to look at going back to 2015 and looking at that committee and seeing if there's opportunity to tap some of those individuals to move forward with a kind of a larger steering committee, if you will. I should note back in 2011 that there was an outside private consulting firm that assisted with this process. So that is not an option for us this time around. So everything will be incumbent upon staff in the commission to kind of work on at the very least, kind of the administration of any kind of review or steering committee, public meetings, public input, so on and so forth. So we're going to be kind of sharing that responsibility, as it were, moving forward. So just wanted to keep that in mind. Should also note too that we have 2 additional steering committees moving forward here this year through Community Development Department. That also will involve some input and conversation with the Plan Commission. Those are the Participatory Budgeting Steering Committee, which we're looking to get started here yet this month, as well as the new Housing Opportunities Commission, which also looks to get started here the next month or so. So all that to say that there are 2 other new groups moving forward, again, that staff is responsible for, but even more importantly, that the community is going to provide some representation on. So making sure that we don't kind of spread ourselves too thin amongst staff, the commission, or the community as well. Volunteer burnout is a real thing, so we want to make sure that we don't have folks double or triple booked onto a lot of these different groups. So with that, kind of additional background that was not in the memo, just to say certainly needs to be an opportunity to have some community input, discussion last time talking about neighborhood associations as well, getting their input. As staff, we discussed, again, just really briefly at this point, perhaps some Plan Commission work sessions, like the City Council has, might be an opportunity as well. If not individually to go through the review, at least to have some additional kind of set aside public discussion opportunity, and perhaps some additional public input opportunity as well. So again, just a lot to kind of throw out there for you to consider, just in terms of process for the public input, process for review, and then again, more specifically to the bulleted list, the specific topics or chapters that you'd like to consider as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to commission members for thoughts and guidance from here.
Commissioner Christopherson.
Thank you. I don't want to overwhelm people with too much information here, but 2 years ago, when I attended my first League of Municipalities, they had a presentation by Baldwin, who had done their comprehensive plan on a very intense citizen engagement level, and they were just really excited about it, and I've seen them at other events where they're presenting that same experience. But I thought it made me think that that actually could be done, that you could have a citywide document that was generated by intense citizen engagement, but what their experience was switching from that listening session for staff, where citizens or residents come and talk about what they want, and that's interpreted by staff listening to what they're saying. So when I saw this, I thought, well, maybe there would be a way that we could very intentionally engage our residents in some of these areas. So I will describe my thought, and then I can email this to you afterwards. So I hope I can be clear enough. What I did was I looked at this document that Mr. Allen provided, which talked about the chapters in the comprehensive plan. And I combined the two that are economic development and then downtown is one. So there's 7, you'd have 7 groups. And Mr. Allen threw out this idea that the last time around we had 27 people. Who are they going to be? So I thought, well, you've got 7. Maybe you have 3 individuals on each one of those issues, so you have 21. So your overarching group that is organized by the Plan Commissioner, 21 people that are interested in those particular areas. So you'd have land use and growth management, you'd have transportation plan, you'd have parks, greenways, and trails, you'd have that combined one of economic development in downtown, you'd have urban design, housing, and governmental cooperation. And I'm imagining that those 3 people would be recruited based on their interest and experience in that. So you wouldn't just be winging out there and saying, Joel Christopherson, I want you to become somewhat knowledgeable about land use and growth management, and then I want you to chair this thing. So those would, you'd be targeting people for the 3 persons. And I also suggest that not only would you have some interest or experience, but you'd also have somebody in that 3-person leadership on that has some experience in leading an engagement process, so that you'd have some really active listening and you'd have some really responsiveness that would draw leadership from your resident group. Okay, so you've got these 21 people, they're targeted, they're experienced, but in that group, then they are really our 21. They're going to have a product at the end, and they're the ones that are responsible for coming back with this recommended update. But those 3 people then are going to be heading a task force that is going to have y'all that are interested in this topic, you come. We've got 3 groups, 3 meetings. That's all we're scheduling. It's 3 meetings, and it's going to be a process that first meeting we do this, second meeting we do that, 3rd meeting, done. But let's say urban design, that's going to be members of the community, architects, developers, planners, wannabe planners, college students, somebody that really wants to have some input. And they're going to be really interested and responsive, we're hoping. And then if you don't have anybody, then you really are just working with those 3 identified individuals that are going to generate over those 3 meetings whatever's coming back for the Plan Commission to see as recommendations. But in my fleshing that out, so you've got these 21 people, they break down into 3 groups of 3. They're going to lead a citizen engagement process of 3 meetings of y'all come. And I see that the benefits is it's going to give us a broader citizen, resident representation as opposed to 27. You'll have 21 plus whoever you can activate. you're going to limit the conversation in time commitments. So I'm not going to need to know about all of this stuff. So I may not be very interested in transportation, but I'm way into the housing plan. So if I'm into the housing plan, that's where you go. You can engage more fully. You can have more input and impact. You're going to have a large amount of information that's going to happen simultaneously. So you can be doing transportation at the same time that this housing group. I think, and then last, the staff involvement can be strategically allocated. So Mr. Allen and his staff aren't necessarily, they can be, but they're not necessarily the key persons. They certainly are at the end when it's all coming back, but they aren't necessarily in the process. So that's my pitch. I think it's broader. I think it can be deeper. I think it saves the staff some engagement. But also, I think when you talk about this affordable, no, it's not. What is the other one?
The task force or the Housing Opportunities Commission?
The one that's about the budget, participatory budgeting.
Oh, sorry, budgeting, yes.
That's also going to generate people that are interested in a project that's in a very specific part, and they may become, they might want to be really interested in what does the city say about that in the comprehensive plan as they plan their project. So we could look at that as being, holy smokes, that's a lot of stuff going, or it could be, wow, we've got some people that are really targeted, and we can really support that participation in the places where it applies. So, done.
I just have a question for you. Are you envisioning, so you said all these, the 7 groups of 3 who are dealing with different chapters here will meet simultaneously, so there's a lot going on at once, and then are you envisioning that they come together at the end of the meeting so everybody understands? For example, I would say that transportation would be very interested in what housing has to say, and vice versa.
I didn't think about that. You'd have to imagine around that. It could be that when you've got your reporting back, that's when you share information and get feedback. You could have them scheduled so that right up front, there's one general feedback. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peterson.
I had the same feelings as Chairperson Larson did too, that there's overlap between these chapters. So I think besides the individual meetings, I really agree with the experts in each of these areas, because some people know about something, they may not know about the other, but I think those 21 people need to meet occasionally so that they can deal with what is cross-referenced. There might be 3 different chapters that all apply to the same thing. So I think that interconnection needs to be there too. But I like having the experts, so you're only dealing with something that you've got experts that have expertise in this given area as opposed to the generalities, because a lot of times you have a 27-member group, they may sit there and be bored to death for 5 of the chapters. So, but I think they need to get back together so that one chapter isn't saying something that's totally converse to the other chapter, and they do intermingle.
Commissioner? Yes.
I'm simply going to make a note in my little design here that would be something that needs to be considered. I don't think the design eliminates that, but you definitely want that to be in there in the most appropriate way. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wolfe Grant.
Well, Commissioner Christopherson, I really appreciate the depth of your plan. I'm not going to have to say much because my thoughts and ideas mirror yours, but you went into very, very useful depth. What's important to me is community ownership of something with this kind of scope. I too would support meetings that would address the intersections of all 7 of these groups, but I am fully in support of this general plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think, I mean, the more we can find very specific ways for people to be involved in their expertise, the better. Obviously, we have certain commissions that already have been diving into these topic areas very closely, like Transit Commission on Chapter 3 for the Transportation System Plan. A lot of the references here are to transit. And then Waterways and Parks, obviously, with Chapter 5. You know, Chapter 10, we have that new Housing Opportunities Commission. So I think, you know, some of the people that are already involved in those could be really good people to be a part of the process that that Councilmember Christopherson mentioned. I also think, you know, and maybe this is partly having not been at the last meeting where these areas were maybe focused on a bit more or identified. It seems like we should open it up to the public to really have input on the entire plan in little pieces of it that they want to pull out for focus, as opposed to us necessarily deciding these are the chapters we're going to work on. So there could be some sort of kickoff to this that is not necessarily defined by this one letter that we have here, but is more open, and then allows people to break out into work groups for the areas that are of interest in it. These seem, I guess I wasn't at the last meeting, but were these presented by staff initially, and then maybe some additional ones were added by the commission, or how did that work exactly?
Good question. No, this was simply initial staff level kind of quick review of the entire comprehensive plan. So this is not entirely exclusive or inclusive necessarily. So if any of these chapters perhaps are simply maybe, I would say administrative, but more kind of Scribner's errors types of thing that need to be just internally reviewed, that's one possibility. If there are other chapters that should be included, that's an option as well. All of the guiding principles and kind of implementation program is found in that chapter 15 though. So that's really going to be kind of the final, again, kind of guiding chapter. There may be some modifications, again, very likely to these other chapters. The seven that were identified, kind of 7 groupings, does not, if there's an 8th or 9th, that's up for discussion. If only 5 perhaps are more relevant, that's an option as well. So it's really just kind of a initial framework for discussion purposes.
Just a follow-up to that, you know, I guess I just had a question as to, you know, one of the topics that has come up is the issue of parking minimums and whether we want to make changes to that. I'm assuming that's within Chapter 2, just to kind of make sure it's covered here in the scope. The land use and growth management plan, or is that somewhere else?
I have tabs on mine, so let me take a look here. We have to come back to that one, but unless somebody else has that memorized. Anyone? No?
You want to come back to that?
We may have to. I think that's probably a good estimate in terms of where that would be. There's also the transportation system plan, which again, that's more the roadway side of things and such. So yeah, if you give me a moment, I'll try to find where that might be. But yes, there's certainly things within the work plan, I mean, to the larger comment, that can and will inform the comprehensive plan review process as well. So parking is one of those. There's the transit development plan as noted in here as well. That's under review for this year, and that will likely inform at least a portion of the transportation system plan, chapter 3. So there would be certain things that have some additional processes that will speak into this above and beyond or separate from what, kind of we may be doing in our group here.
So if Commissioner Graggart has an interest in discussing that, we can include it. No
Certainly,
matter
I
what
think there's-
chapter
yeah,
it's in, I
yes,
mean, we can
yes.
discuss that.
Absolutely, there's an expectation, I believe, even for that. So things in your annual work program kind of point you back to that as well, that are identified for this year, likely going to have some kind of interaction with the comprehensive plan review as well.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Peterson?
That's probably one of the very items that I was referring to, that it may be something that's handled by 2 or 3 different chapters, and that's where, you want to make sure that one chapter is not saying something completely opposite of the other chapter. The other thing, since this is going to be staff managed as opposed to a consultant, if you're going to have periodic meetings, I would suggest don't have all 7 chapters on Tuesday night. Have one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday, and then the next week have, 2 or 3 there too, so that the citizens, along with, let's say you have 3 experts in land use, if one of those experts wanted to attend economic development, they'd have, a chance to go to that one too, where they weren't meeting at the same time. And that might help avoid some of that conflict between the different chapters too.
Thank you. I have a question for Commissioner Christopherson. So is this basically what you heard from the Baldwin group that you were talking about? Did you say it was Baldwin?
Yep.
That
Yeah.
was excited about the process they'd used? Is this
There,
what they did?
that was led by a consultant, and it really had no staff involvement at all. So this consultant created the marketing identity of this conversation, facilitated all of the conversations, and it was much broader than this. But to me, the takeaway was that it can work to have a very intense citizen engagement process, and that disengaged, I have no impact on this conversation is not necessarily the experience. So,
Is this the way they structured it though, with having small groups work on different chapters, or?
no, not exactly. I mean, if you stood back and squinted, yes, I would say it is somewhat, because it was large, small groups, discussion,
Okay.
feedback loop. But it was not generated by chapters. It was, what do you want your city to be doing? They generated the topic, period.
Okay,
So it was,
I see. Thank you. Any other discussion?
Just have one more thing.
Mr. Allen?
At least for Commissioner Peterson's benefit, I should note anyone rolling off of the commission will be automatically assigned to one of these groups. So just mention that.
I'm interested in feedback from primarily Mr. Allen, but any staff who has thoughts on what we've been discussing here.
I want my pay doubled.
We could possibly even triple it. I should note too, again, want to point back to that chapter 15. Happy to email that out to everybody again as well. That's the kind of the guiding plan implementation program that will really kind of set in motion any new changes, any new, I guess, action steps moving forward for the next 5 years. So just to kind of bring us back to that 5-year review, that to kind of just keep us kind of framed into a review process and not a full rewrite process. And again, that's I'm in part to blame for that, because they laid out all these wonderful chapters that we should all take a look at and make edits to. And it may just be that. It may be, again, the last time this was done, there were 3 meetings. I would say in and out, but There's a large group, but they had 3 meetings, very directed, very pointed, very specific in what they're reviewing. And it may be that's the best approach here too, is to break this into these multiple kind of subgroups, have very targeted meetings, come back together, have final discussion, and move forward. Again, a lot of this will involve simple updates to what's already been done or things in the works, but some of these too, admittedly so. In Chapter 10, for example, housing plan. A lot has happened in the last 5 years to really to look a little bit more closely, specifically at that. So not to say some groups may be shorted in terms of what they're going to be reviewing, but you know, that's what staff will kind of take a step back and look at as well, and wanted to lay these out in terms of these are additional review opportunities, but kind of put back onto the commissioners here. Please take a look at each of those chapters in the comprehensive plan and see if, you know, again, more could be combined perhaps. There's a lot of overlap as we've discussed. If some perhaps are more just, okay, we just need to do some tweaking here and there, provide some updates from the past 5 years. Again, and others perhaps may be demanding additional involvement. Perhaps it's more than a group of 3, for example. It's a larger group that involves other, as Commissioner Greger mentioned, it may involve other boards or commissions and their review and input as well. So we can certainly go back and work on that, and we will, to kind of look to see, you know, is Chapter 2 who might best be involved, the who being, you know, which groups, which boards, commissions, committees and such, and then more specifically which areas pointing back to Chapter 15, because each of these individual chapters have a section in that Chapter 15. And so for the next time, perhaps that's what we can do, is kind of look through that and request the same of everyone here as well. Please take a look at each of these and see, okay, wow, you know, with Chapter 5, Parks, Greenways, and Trails System Plan, the 5-year update that was done 2018, perhaps that's sufficient. Perhaps we just pull pieces from there, and that doesn't require additional kind of a subgroup review. Or perhaps it needs only Parks and Waterways to review it, you know, once or twice, and we move forward. So again, not to go on and on, but to say, see what your thoughts are in each of these different chapters, what you think might need to take place to update each of those, and then we can come back next meeting and have more informed discussion at that point. Not that we're not informed now, but kind of more specifically identified discussion for each of those chapters, because that will help the staff then lay out, you know, maybe it's a succession of 3 meetings 1 week, and we have the large group meeting the next week, as Mr. Peterson mentioned, and it's as, I would say, as simple as that, but it's as simple a structure as that. And we go from there.
Okay. Any other discussion? Commissioner Christopherson.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I can't stop, but I can't stop. So thank you, Mr. Allen, and this is just a wonderful way to become immersed in the comprehensive plan. But I do want to say in front of the Plan Commission that as I've gone into District 4, which is the west side, and maybe we're different than the rest of the city, I'm sure we are, but there's an incredible lack of knowledge about the fact that the city's got a plan. So anytime you can really go back to the residents and say, oh, did you know? You know, for 15 years, we've been talking about these trails, and by golly, look at just using this as an opportunity to introduce our residents to the process of a compassionate government that really is looking after and planning with their money for things to happen would be a great result if we had really even no change to the comprehensive plan. Just that knowledge and a resident acceptance of, oh my goodness, look at all these wonderful things that our city has going and planned. That would be great.
Okay. Any other discussion? Commissioner Greger.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess one of the pieces of it that I was interested in too, and maybe maybe as staff thinks this through a bit more as well, is just how, I guess kind of going back to, I served on the Citizens Advisory Committee for the update of the comprehensive plan in 2015. And I noticed that there wasn't really a process to officially amend or recommend language for the comprehensive plan. It was, and partly that, and then actually like vote on it as a steering committee or as a body that was there for several meetings to work on it. And that may have been a function of the consultant having a certain process too, and certain traditions, I guess, in the way we've done these plans. But it would seem to me that we should explore a way for people to specifically propose changes and have them considered in a format that is open to that, I guess you could say. I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. One example, we've talked about commissions a few other times. So for Chapter 3, what if we had, the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee and the Transit Commission, review the transportation system plan, and actually vote on whether they agree with the language before it goes to its final form to Plan Commission. That adds some extra steps, but those are the people that have been working on this for, in some case, a decade for some of those folks. And I wonder, if we may have some changes come that way, in addition to having little working groups or having our larger meetings. So that's just something I want to throw out there as possible ways to organize this and just get a few more definitive changes that people may want to make, and make them feel comfortable doing that.
Okay, any other discussion? Mr. Allen?
I don't mean to take the last word, but no, these are great comments, input here tonight. Appreciate it. And as formal and official as this looks, since it says memorandum with the new logo and everything, it really is a lot of thinking out loud. So again, just want to make sure that we're still kind of exactly in this kind of discussion phase, and there are no bad ideas. Just want to make sure we've got everything out there so we don't miss something. Similarly, along with that, these are just initial thoughts in terms of chapters. If we move forward with these types of groups, or even remove another, one or more of these, just want to be really intentional about that, and that we all understand and agree that, okay, so we're not reviewing Chapter 11, which is Historic and Cultural Resources Plan, because, and then we can kind of agree to that and move forward, so that we're not excluding things just for simplicity's sake, but we are strategic in the chapters that are being reviewed, and that we're not excluding something for, again, just for expediency's sake. So think about that over the next 2 weeks here, in terms of making sure we've got kind of all the topics and chapters we wanted to take a look at. Perhaps that's what we look at for next time is, are we kind of good with this core group of chapters, and are we good with Chapter 15, which again is that driving chapter for the action steps moving forward. Again, we may be updating all of the chapters in that plan implementation program one way or another, but we may perhaps not be going back specifically to that chapter and reorganizing it or changing a lot of text. So these are the ones that, again, just initially were kind of in the forefront for that more deep dive type of review. So again, just thinking ahead and thinking out loud a little bit with the various parts of the comprehensive plan. We're not doing a full rewrite. We're doing a review, and somewhere in between those two things, we want to be very diligent and specific about why we're not doing parts and why we are doing other parts.
Okay. Any other discussion? Commissioner Gregor?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one other thing for folks to think about, and maybe this falls into the category of more of a rewrite, and I'm guessing it does, but than a review. But like, at what point do we discuss like a new chapter on a new topic that maybe is outside the box a little bit than what we've traditionally been working within? Because I remember, 5 years ago, there was some discussion about creating like a poverty chapter to kind of put together some of there's probably better words to use maybe to title it, but to put together some of the city's priorities for addressing poverty or addressing, income challenges in the community. So I'm guessing this is not the time, but I'm sort of wondering when is. So in terms of when we get to that point of adding a new chapter.
Great question. Last time, again, 2011, when the review was done, one of the action steps was to put forward the health chapter. And that was done in 2013. So perhaps, not to further defer it, but that may be exactly the action step that may come out of one of these chapter reviews or that plan implementation program, is to, again, in the next 2 to 3 years, provide or develop a policy or chapter on poverty.
Okay.
So again, great question. I think this is the time to recommend that as an action step, but perhaps not as an actual new chapter today.
All right, thanks.
Any other discussion? You're done?
I think so. Next meeting.
Okay, let's move on. Code compliance items. Oops, sorry. Any future agenda items that we wanted to talk about? And any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, without objection, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire. A transcript of this meeting is available for the hearing impaired. It will be available within 7 days of this telecast. Call 715-839-4912 or TDD 715-839-1689 or write Eau Claire City Clerk, P.O. Box 5148, Eau Claire, Wisconsin 54702-5148. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.